Shalom, party people, and welcome to the 12th C 0500. Rocking it on a Ruck march solo this morning. I've already done 3 miles at a relatively leisurely pace, and I'm gonna see about putting in another 4 before calling it for the day. So now might as be as good a time as any. I grew up in a relatively stable, pretty decent home. No out of the ordinary childhood as far as just a good life, I guess. My parents were together. We went to church on Sundays. You know, all that in a bag of chips, I guess. I grew up in the church. I was born on a Sunday, and that was really one of the only Sundays that I missed going to church. So, you know, pretty well totally grew up in it without much issue. When I was born, my parents went to a Methodist church, and we left that church in, probably the very early 2000s. But I was at least old enough that whenever I visit extended family and end up going to their church out of respect for them, and it ends up being a Methodist church, you know, I still remember the service format. I still remember, you know, the main hymns that they'll sing. Still remember the order of service. So I was at least old enough to have left an impression. But my parents made the decision to go ahead and leave the Methodist church when I was in grade school, and we ended up going to a non-denominational church that you know, very different order of service, very different just lineup in comparison to the, I guess, and I wouldn't say that a Methodist church is like a strict order of service or anything, but there's a lot more structure. So I was used to that, whereas this non-denominational church was a lot more laid back as far as structure goes, but very, very much more in depth as far as Bible teaching went, because the Bible was actually open and used and pages turned in the sermon, and it was expected that you'd follow along. So it was quite good on that end for sure. One thing I will give credit to the more structured churches is the reverence that is given. I think is in some aspects good. Although I've seen a lot of people in those types of churches that are very, you know, reverent, at least during the service, and then don't really seem to have a concept of what holiness is outside of those services. So there is that, whereas I've seen at non-denominational churches a very loose grasp on what sin is, a very loose grasp on what salvation actually means, and not saying that your more structured, formal churches have great understandings of that either, but just noticed like painting with a very broad brush. But anyway, I was probably 10-ish years old. Yeah, I think I was about 10 years old when I was old enough to go to church camp. And it was a camp that I had heard about my sister going to all the time, and it sounded like a lot of fun, and so I got to go. And a whole lot of fun, sang a lot of songs, did a lot of stuff that young kids find fun, a lot of stuff that older kids find fun. The camp had go-karts, and got to just run around and be a kid. For a kids camp, they had a very, very graphic version of the crucifixion that they would do as a play every summer. And for, I don't know, like a 10-year-old kid, it's like, that's a lot, for the camp ended at early high school. And by the time I was in early high school and had seen them do it, it wasn't near as graphic as it is for like a 10-year-old. But I guess that was the first time that I had really put thought into my Messiah actually dying for me and what that looked like. I was familiar with the Passion of the Christ film, but I had never really thought about it. And I don't know how many 10-year-olds actually think about those kind of things. And I went up front and I prayed the prayer, and I don't really know how different I was from that. I did start to take church more seriously after that. I did start paying attention more, and I think those were good. But that was kind of the extent of my faith as a 10-year-old. Was, I would read my Bible a little bit, and I would pray a little bit, and I did pay attention. And I think that is at least where faith journey started for me. And so I got baptized very shortly after that whole running up front and praying the prayer. And I'm going to say this: a prayer does not save you. Water does not save you. It's only Messiah who saves you. But at the beginning of that is definitely where the journey started. So fast forward a couple of years, and I don't know where it came from specifically, but I know it was a lie that was whispered in my ear from the devil that I had to be good, And that's what mattered, was just being good. And I started keeping metrics of how good I was being. I would mentally track every day of, okay, I did the things that were expected of me. I was obedient. I, prayed this much. I read my Bible this much. I started really wanting to gain knowledge, I guess. And the knowledge that I was trying to gain was more important than the source of that knowledge to me. And so I started getting arrogant, because it's like, oh, I know this much more than you do. I started focusing on the Kent Hovind, young earth creationism, which I'm not an old earth creationist, and I do believe in the literal 7 days of creation, 6, and then resting on the 7th. And I do believe that the earth is young. But a lot of creationists seem to forget that creation is not the gospel. And they will treat creationism as primary doctrine. And that's what I did. I treated it like, if you didn't believe this exact set of circumstances in this exact timeline in this exact number of years, and this is exactly how it was, and if you don't believe that, then you're going to hell. And it's like, hang on, that's kind of adding some things. And that's what I bought into. And then I read all of the adult Left Behind books, not the kids ones, and got pretty diehard pre-trib rapture and started mistaking the Left Behind books for the gospel. And really, really heavily latched onto those. The first book and the last book in the Bible. And all of the things that were tied in and associated. And to the point that I was really looking down on other people. Other people that were actually living and active in the faith, but just didn't care about what I cared about. And my level of arrogance just kept growing and growing, and it turned into real disdain for other people. Started getting a really holier than thou complex about things. And about midway through high school, was carrying a Bible around with me everywhere I went for show. Barely reading it. And just definitely had a I'm holier than you mindset, even though I was nowhere near even the beginning of holiness. I was spending 8 hours a day looking at stuff on the internet that I didn't need to be looking at. Just wasting time. slowly started to realize through actually starting to listen again, actually starting to crack the spine of that Bible that I was carrying around, that, hey, hang on a second. Some of these things aren't adding up. And I know that was his spirit being that still small voice whispering, saying, hey, I'm over here, man. You need to stop chasing all that and start following me. And so I started asking for help. Still pretty arrogant about it, but I started asking for help. And had a very dear friend pour into me for years. And these were long years of long late night conversations, just really wrestling with a lot of concepts. And I didn't realize it, but I was being discipled. And it made picking up the Bible and actually reading it to get closer to my Creator enjoyable. Somewhere along the way, just stopped trying to do things for myself and realized, hey, he knows what's best for me. I need to seek his will above my own. And if it weren't for that discipling that was coming from that really good friend of mine, definitely wouldn't be where I am today. Because it all boiled down to actually opening that Bible and paying attention to the books in between Genesis and Revelation, and not opening it and like, oh, I already know what this says. It's like, no, what does it say? Read it. Oh, missed that. And then start applying what you're reading. Actually reading it and doing what it says. Good place to start. So, a couple of years go by. And I'm in college. And there's a book that I'm reading. And this book that I'm reading is about a girl who just outright dropped everything, moved to Africa, and started taking care of orphans, and has adopted like 19 kids, I think. And I was really convicted, like, oh, hey, am I actually doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Now, mind you, I had originally signed up to go to college to get ready to go into the world as a missionary, like as a professional missionary, is what I thought I needed to do. And I think it was that same voice, Satan, whispering in my ear, saying, hey, if you're not a missionary or a pastor or a super Christian, then you're not a real Christian. I started believing that. And some of those older ways of looking down on people crept in. I actually did hit some people with my Bible. So quite literally was a Bible thumper. But this book that I was reading kind of got an existential crisis when I read it of like, I'm not doing enough. And that was where the issue was, is I am not doing enough. So I was intercepted by a very good friend, and he's like, hey, I'm gonna take you to someone that we both know, love, and trust, and you can talk to them, and if at the end of that conversation you still think you need to drop everything and go somewhere to be a full-time missionary just out of the blue, then I'll drive you to the airport myself. But if these people talk you out of this, then you'll know that it was just you going through an existential crisis and not actually being called to drop everything and go, which I'm going to preface, I do believe that does happen, drop everything and go, but I don't think that's what I was being called to. And he took me to these people, and we talked for about 6 hours, prayed a lot, cried a lot, and it boiled down to the counting the cost passage that Messiah talks about when he is, hey, if you're going to build a tower, you need to sit down and weigh your expenses and see if you actually have what it takes to build this tower. And if you're going to go to war, you need to understand that with the number of troops that you have, if you can't meet that greater opposing force with those number of troops, then, and what it boiled down to was I hadn't been faithful in the small things. I had a mission field of a high school that was 2,000 kids, and I was very, very cold-shouldered to them. I was happy to feel superior in faith to them and watch as they all went to hell. And not all of them, I'm just painting broad brush strokes there. But I was like, hey, I got my one or two friends that I care about, and then all the rest of you, sucks for y'all. I had been on some overseas mission trips and didn't really care about the people I was talking to. It was more of me. I was in a very intensive, hands-on mechanical program where I was rubbing shoulders very, very closely with about 13, 14 other people for 2 years, and was not loving on these people, was not trying to show them the way. I prayed for a couple of them every once in a while, but that was really about it. And it was, hey, you're you not being faithful in these little things. So why in the world do you think he's going to trust you on the big things? You're trying to run the marathon without doing the speed work. You're trying to run the marathon without putting in the miles of training beforehand. And they're like, we're not going to tell you you're not ready, but we're going to let his spirit tell you that, because how can you be faithful with that? You need to actually count this cost. Do you think he's led you to this yet, or are you trying to do this for your own pride? And that hit me like a ton of bricks. I started realizing, you know what, I need to take this more seriously, focus on him more and less on me. About 3 weeks later, one of the guys in that program who I had completely written off got baptized. And we talked a little, but it had absolutely nothing to do with anything I said to him. The only reason we really talked a little is that he knew that I owned a Bible and I cracked the spine every so often. And what I got from that one was a wake-up call of kind of what Mordecai says to Esther of, hey, he can use you, but if you don't hop on this gravy train, he's going to use somebody else. And you aren't going to be part of the blessing that's that, and he can leave you behind and still get his will done. So, do you want to be a part of this, or do you want... do you want to be a part of this, or do you want to get left behind? And not in the left behind books sense, but in the sense of you can hop on this gravy train or you can miss out. And it's just like, oh, okay. Yes, sir. I want to be useful to you, sir, was my kind of new ethos. And finished that school, got my aviation maintenance license, and it's like, okay, well, if I'm not going to go into full-time missions, what am I going to do? So my dad was working for a company that did contract work for some oil companies, and signed me up. Let's go drill for some oil. Got on an oil crew, did just under 6 months with them before I got injured. Learned while I was there to not look down on people. Was with a crew that was pretty rough. I was underage still, and so I designated drove for them. Took them to the bars, and was just like, oh, okay. You guys know that I've got faith, but I'm not gonna treat you ill. I want to work with you. We can talk. You can ask what I think about something. You can ask why I do things a certain way. But no pressure, man. Led to some really good conversations. One of the guys on my crew died. And that was kind of a wake-up call of, I can't dance around these issues. It's going to be too late if I'm just nice to people about some of this. So it instilled a sense of urgency. So I get out of the oil field due to an injury, bounce back from that injury pretty quick. Had a lot of bed rest, a lot of physical therapy, but after about halfway through that physical therapy, I was mostly okay. Morning. So far, so good. Yeah, yourself? Yeah. So I bounced back about midway through that physical therapy. And then was really just kind of looking for what to do next. Conveniently, I had some money from the oil field, and my fiance at the time, now wife, and I were talking about things, and it was, hey, this is as good a time as any for me to move up here. So moved up to part of the world that I'm in right now, and the girl that I married, we met when gas was $4 a gallon back in 2013, and drove 8.5 hours one way just to see each other. And when I was in high school, gas was under $2 a gallon. So, you know, a literal doubling of gas over a couple of years was ridiculous. And we were young and in love, and we're still in love today. It's just not as young as we were. Still whippersnappers, though, in the grand scheme of things. But it was, hey, I can't afford to keep driving up here, and I don't want to stop seeing you, so let's get married. And anyway, we get married pretty quick after I move up here. And I hold over a couple of different jobs. And still trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Still trying to figure out what I was called to do. Through a series of events, I end up saying, you know what, it's time to finish my college. And I took a part-time job to hold me over while I was doing school online. And meet this dude, and we butt heads like from jump. I didn't like him, he didn't like me. And his worldview was very anti the Bible. He grew up in church like I did. He saw a lot of hypocrisy, and he bounced. And he sowed his wild oats. And was proud about it. And the younger me would have been very hostile towards him. Now, I already said that we butted heads and I didn't like the guy. That changed pretty quick. We ended up becoming pretty good friends. And I'm overwhelmed with a sense of sharing the gospel with them. And I try several times. We have long conversations, late into the night, days, hours, years go by. Always trying to stay a part of each other's life, hang out, help each other on home projects, praying for them regularly, trying to ask, just like, hey, why is this something that you're running from? And you know, our friendship isn't based on me trying to share the gospel with them, but it's a big part of it. Years go by to the point where I'd given up praying for him. Because I was like, you know what? I still believe that you're going to save him in your own timing, but I guess that timing's not what I was hoping it was going to be. Get a renewed sense to start praying for him. Mentally convinced. All right, cool. He's gonna accept Messiah. He's gonna come back. He's gonna be home. I was overwhelmed with the sense of hey, I'm worshiping my Creator right now, and one day I'm going to be standing in front of him, and let's be honest, I'm not going to be standing, my face is going to be in the dirt, and I'm going to be in tears of, sir, I'm not worthy. Why did you save a wretch like me? And the thought goes through my head of that's going to happen, and this buddy of mine's not going to be with me. And so I'm scared for him. Keep talking to him, keep praying for him. Years go by. And I give up again. And I know that his salvation is not dependent on my intercession for him, but I'm just heavy laden and burdened that he doesn't know the Messiah, that he doesn't walk with him. And I'm ashamed of the fact that I gave up praying for him, because maybe he would have come to faith sooner. His mom dies, and he starts reading her Bible. Got a lifetime's worth of notes written into the margins. And one day out of the blue, we're just talking, and he's like, oh, by the way, I've started reading my mom's Bible, and I'm thinking about coming to church. Cool. I was doing everything I could to not explode with joy over that. But I was trying to keep my cool. And we start hanging out even more. And I start to see his faith really growing. And he pulls me aside several months in and thanks me. And I'm like, dude, none of that was me. Like, I love you 100%. I love you, bud. But that was not me. I told him I had given up praying for him twice. And that if it had been up to me, he would have come to faith a long time ago. But that his timing of coming in, if anything, could have been delayed because I had given up praying for him. But that his salvation was not because of me. His salvation was because of the work that Messiah did. And to never let his thanks go to my head, because it was not anything that I did. And what I'm currently learning falls back on that pivotal conversation in that existential crisis, was that I need to be faithful in the small things and faithful with what he has trusted me with. Go do hard things.